So we then move on to the patronage of the Arabs. So again, if we look at the map here, Arabia is in between the two major empires, and the emperors on either side don't really care for entering Arabia and having a position there. It's a neutral zone. However, they do work with those kingdoms who are bordering the region into their empires. So towards the, you can say, the eastern front, you have the Sassanid Empire and the emperors who are working with and electing and giving honors and giving resources to those tribes closest to them. So, for example, Banu Lakhm, the Lakhmid, yeah? They are the closest empire or kingdom of Arabs in that region. So they have a close relationship with the Persianate world. So these emperors then begin to patronize these tribes. And we have, for example, many great tribes at the time who either became Christian voluntarily, they were not forced into Christianity, they voluntarily accepted Christianity, or those who were loyal to the Persians on the eastern flank. So I'm going to give you a few examples here. One of the most famous tribes in Arabia, and in fact, one that posed a great threat to the Muslims in Medina, were Banu Ghassan. Banu Ghassan, or the Jafnids, were a tribe of people who came from Yemen originally, and most of these Arab tribes who settled in the Hijaz and towards the northern part of Arabia come from the southern region of Arabia, from Yemen. We're going to discover that and explore that when we discuss the great migrations out of Yemen, which precede even this part of history. But there were Kahlan Arabs of Yemeni Himyaritic origin. So they came from the south. They settled in the northern regions. And because they were so close to the Christian Byzantine emperors and their kingdoms, they became effectively a vassal state. They were given power. And for some time, they ruled even in Syria. Now, they had many kings who became very well known. And as I said before, the Christian emperors would actually erect statues in their honor. So they were very highly, you can see here, Justinian is holding a crown. He, the emperor of Byzantium, is holding a crown for this Christian king, Al-Harith. Al-Harith has a crucifix or a cross on his neck. It's very clearly Christian. And you can see behind there's an Arab woman, or an Arab man, traditional Arab man, an Arab stallion. So this is in Arabia. And you can see the Christian Europeans showing deference and reverence and holding gifts for Al-Harith. You can see court scribes, Arabs writing. Amazing stuff. So Banu Ghassan were a very prominent tribe because they were the ones who preserved the interests of the Christian emperors in Arabia. They were also the custodians of Damascus and Syria, regions that would be very important and very key for the Muslims later on. So all of those regions were occupied by these Christian Arabs. Now, Banu Ghassan became Christian voluntarily. They learned the language of the empire. They were literate, and they had access to the Old and New Testaments. So for want of a better word, they were European Arabs, basically. Yeah, in that sense, they took the religion, the customs, the languages, and they resided in those regions that were closest to the European Mediterranean realms. Yeah, and they were given high honors. So Al-Harith is one of those examples. In fact, he ruled over the Golan Heights in Syria for a long time. Yeah. So they followed a form of Christianity that was different to those in the southern regions. As I said before, not all Arab Christians were the same. Not all Arab Christians were the same. They had different sects, different aqa'id, different creeds. Some believed Jesus was God and man, na'udhu all in one. Others believed there's a difference. It was God and then human. They had different natures. So these sorts of differences in terms of the ideology and creed would distinguish one tribe from another tribe. So one Christian tribe coming from Najran doesn't have the same belief necessarily as the Christian tribes coming from Syria. And they were both Arab speaking and Arab people, but they had different Christian ideologies. Then we have another very famous Arab tribe and kingdom who also served the interests of a neighboring empire. But this time they worked with the Persian emperors. Imr al-Qais, who we know in the Seerah and in Islamic tradition, is known as a very, very, very prominent poet in Jahiliyyah. And one of the greatest poets of Arabia, in fact, next to Labid. Yeah? Labid, Imr al-Qais, and others such as him are known for their immense poetry. He was a king or a prince of Banu Kinda. Later on, when his father dies, and it's a very famous anecdote, his father dies, and he ran away from this kingdom. And the envoy comes to him and says to him, your father has died. And he says to him, something like, he's drinking alcohol, I'm enjoying myself right now. Yeah, hold on for a bit, let me enjoy myself. So he was a thrill seeker. He was a Casanova. He was somebody who, his poetry, his conquests preceded him. Later on in life, he traveled and he actually went into the the Mediterranean realms in what is now known as Turkey, I believe Anatolia, if I'm not mistaken, Anatolia, where he died. Okay, so he's buried there, and they had a massive mausoleum in honor of him. Imr al-Qais was an example of that. Now, when we look at the ancient Arab poets, there are many theories as to whether they're Christian or not Christian. There are some Orientalists who have claimed that the likes of Antar ibn Shaddad, the very famous poet whose poetry was hung outside the Kaaba, Antar ibn Shaddad, some claim he was a Christian. There's not enough proof, okay? But it's not far-fetched because we know there were many Christians at that time and many of those poets were Christian. So it's not beyond reason that Antar could have been Christian, Ibn Shaddad. Same with Imr al-Qais. Was he a Christian? Was he a pagan? Because Banu Kinda were mixed. They were Christian, some were Christian, some were not Christian, some were pagan. Okay? But they served the Byzantine emperors and also the Himyaritic kings. So Himyar would also employ certain sub-tribes from Banu Kinda as their envoys into that region. So we then have another tribe, and this is Banu Lakhm. They're also known as An-Nasrid, the Nasrids. So these are not the same Nasrids in North Africa later on. This is how the Europeans describe them, but they're known as Banu Lakhm. And these are also from southern Arabia. Yeah? So most of these tribes come from southern Arabia, including Aus and Khazraj from southern Arabia. And they settle up north and different parts of the Arabian Peninsula and establish for themselves communities, cities, even kingdoms. So Banu Lakhm were amongst those who settled in the eastern regions, central eastern regions, and they became also Christian, Nestorian. So their Christianity was different from the Christianity of the Banu Ghassan. They were both Christian Arabs, but they had different beliefs in regards to Jesus and his divinity. Okay, so they established a city in Hira, and one of their famous kings was Mundhir ibn Nu'man. Yeah? So he sided with the Persians. Unfortunately for that kingdom, Khosrow II invaded and took over, effectively betrayed and crushed his own allies, and took that region as part of the Persian Empire. Yeah. So that kingdom was crushed by their own ally, and it became part of the Persian Empire. Yeah. So we have a tremendous number of, you could say, alliances regionally with these major empires. Then we have the tribes in Himyar, modern day, you could say Yemen. And there was a connection there in terms of, said, cultural experience, also in terms of political experience. Because when Yusuf Dhun Nawas, the Himyaritic Jewish king, began to persecute the Christians of Najran, Justinian, the Roman emperor, sent letters to Caleb, who was a teenage king in Ethiopia, send him to basically help the Christians of Najran. So he enters Arabia with his soldiers, and they effectively vanquish. And Dhun Nuwas, he flees. He fled into the Red Ocean, into the Red Ocean, yes, into the Red Sea, sorry, where he died of drowning. Yeah. So once he died, the Abyssinians then took over Yemen, and they remained there for about 50 years, up until Abraha decides to go up north to conquer Mecca, and we know what happened after that. Yeah. So they had more of an alliance, or they were politically subjugated by the Abyssinians in that region. Yeah. At that time, also Christianity became more and more prevalent in that region. Although it wasn't as strong as Judaism, it had a lot longer time to settle in southern Arabia. But Christianity became also part of that region. That's why Abraha built the Qillays in Sana'a, a massive cathedral. But when Abraha was defeated, the Persians came in. The Persians came and settled there, up until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent the armies, and Yemen was conquered, and eventually they became Muslim. So Yemen, actually, they went through all three Abrahamic faiths. All three. They received the message of two prophets. They received the message of what? Two prophets. Because the kingdom of Sheba, the Sabaitic or the Sabaean kingdom, Saba, was in Yemen. Some say it was in Ethiopia, but it's the same place, quite frankly. It's just a bit of water in between it, okay? It's the same place. But the kingdom, or the seat of the kingdom, was in Yemen. Sayyidina Sulaiman invited the queen of Sheba, Bilqis. Some call her Makida. The name is not agreed upon, but her title was the Queen of Sheba. He invited her to the faith, which at the time was under the law of Musa, alayhi salatu wasalam. They were following the law of Sayyidina Musa. So Judaism, basically. Later on, the message of Islam arrives in Yemen. Rasulullah sent his emissaries to Yemen, and they embraced Islam. Okay, so they were Jewish, they were Christian, and they are now Muslim. It is indeed the land of faith. Iman, belief, belongs in Yemen. Yeah, so it's a very unique, wonderful people, and they have a distinct position. They have a distinct position in Islam, given they're known to be tender-hearted people, good people, yeah, people of Iman, people of gentleness. And so it's a wonderful history, tremendous history, that they had this, all Abrahamic faiths found their way into the Yemeni heart. Yeah, all Abrahamic faiths found their way into Yemen. So now we move on.
Sorry, before you, I was just going to make a note that, it's also interesting to know that even the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam, he married into Yemeni people.
Indeed, yes, you're right. Yes. Sayyidina Ismail was adopted by the Jurhamites, Banu Jurham. Yes, and from that union we have the Arabized Arab, al-Musta'riba. We have the Arabized Arabs. So indeed, yes, the Yemenis, or the Yemeni tribe of Jurhum, who traveled up north. You had 𝗲𝗎. 𝗲𝗎 was also from Yemen. Right? So they were all from Yemen, basically. But they found their way in Mecca, which was at the time the name of Mecca. And there was a contract between Sayyidatna Hagara and the chieftain of Banu Jurhum. When Sayyidina Ismail became a young man, he married into that tribe. And we have the children of that union. The 12 tribes of Ismail were spread about in Arabia. And we have what we now know as the Adnaniyun, yeah, the Arabized Arabs. The Quraysh were Arabized, Adnaniyun, Arabs. Long history, quite interesting history there.
If you're enjoying this lecture and would like to learn more about the history of ancient Arabia in all of her glory, then you will love Civilis Arabica. This series of lectures is delivered as part of an annual history program for only £10 a month. In it, you'll be able to uncover 2,000 years of pre-Islamic history through an immersive and unique learning experience delivered exclusively through the official Historion app. As a Patreon member, you may register onto this program by selecting the essential tier available on the membership page for instant access to over 7 complete and unique courses ranging from the history of the Umayyad kingdom through to the rise and fall of the empires of Mali and Abyssinia. You will then be granted access to 7 complete and individual courses. Subscriptions may be cancelled at any time. There are no minimum terms or commitments.